Hello everyone and welcome back to the next lesson in our Get Started Fast with Avid Media Composer 7 tutorial series presented by Avid Blogs. My name is Kevin P. McAuliffe, and in this lesson we're going to talk about probably the most important step of the entire editing process, and that is the acquisition process, meaning the importing and capturing of your media. Okay, I'm not going to give you a long introduction here. Let's just get into Avid Media Composer and let's get started. Okay, and first let's start out by talking about importing. Now, importing and AMA linking to, especially if you're coming from an application like Final Cut Pro 7, are going to kind of go hand in hand, and you really need to sort of make that differentiation between when you're going to want to import and when you're going to want to AMA link to. Obviously, AMA linking to gets you up and running faster. Importing, though, gets that footage converted over to MXF files inside of your Avid Media Files folder, so that if you need to take your footage on the road, you don't need to worry about where did all of those files come from. Did I AMA link to them from different drives and all that type of stuff? Nope. When you import, everything's going to be inside of that Avid Media Files folder. Okay, so let's do importing first. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to navigate over to my clips folder, and let's come to my imported clips. I'm just going to double click on it. And to import a clip, very simple. I'm just going to right click and come down to import. Now, of course, I'm going to be asked, where's the clip going to be that you want to import? I'm going to come to footage, and let's just come into my boxing footage. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to the first clip. I'm simply going to select it. Most people immediately come down and just say open, but there's a couple other things you need to keep in mind. First, you're going to see right now, I have my video and audio going to the Mac drive. You can obviously split them up, assuming you have audio on your file. But in most cases, I'm going to leave it going to my one external hard drive, which is my Mac drive. You'll see that I can enable any, or just to look for a very specific type of shot that might happen to be in a bin, because you might have all of these in one bin. In this case, I'm looking for everything. I might want to be specific, just look for MXF, just look for graphics files, just look for audio files. But in most cases, where you're going to be going back and forth to is the options button. What I'm going to do, simply click on options. Once I'm in options, for the importing process, you're really going to be looking at this one main screen. Now, the first section is specifically for the image size adjustments, meaning that if you have a clip that you're importing that matches the current resolution of your project, in most cases, you're just going to stick with image sized for current format. Now, if you're dealing with standard definition and you're importing DV clips into an NTSC 720 by 486 project, you're going to want to make sure you're cropping / padding for that DV scanline difference. And depending on if you have footage that's larger or smaller, you might want to do not resize smaller images to obviously leave them the native size smaller than the current frame size that you're working in. Or you might want to take them and resize them to fit the current format raster, basically meaning just either blow them up or shrink them down. Now next, you're going to need to tell Media Composer, do you want the file pixel to video mapping to be computer RGB dither image colors, or 601/709. Now this really, if you're coming from an application like After Effects, depending on how you export the files, this is going to become relevant, especially obviously because you're going to have scopes beside you in the edit room. You want to make sure that your file pixel to video mapping matches that of the clip. Okay, now in most cases, because the stuff I'm importing is RGB, I'm just going to leave it as computer RGB. And last but certainly not least, if you're importing with an alpha channel, you can tell that you want to invert on import. You want white to be opaque. You don't want to invert, you want black to be opaque. Or in my case, you're just going to want to ignore. Now you'll see that we can also dilate the fill, and here's another great one that I get asked all the time. People are always asking me, how do I get in and change the duration of a freeze frame or of a single frame that I happen to be importing? Let's say it's a JPEG still of, a slate or something like that. Well, this is where you can get in and adjust the duration. This is also where you can tell Media Composer that you want to auto-detect sequentially numbered files, meaning image sequences, target, TIFF, JPEG, etc., etc. This is where you can tell Media Composer to auto-detect sequentially numbered files. I'm going to say OK. And last but certainly not least, we just need to decide on the resolution that we want to import, whether it's a DNx HD 60 or 90. I'm just going to leave it as 60. I'll just again select the first clip and simply say open. And you're going to see that in a matter of seconds here, you'll see it even tells me how long, about 10 seconds in total, how long it's going to take me to get this into my project, which is still pretty quick considering this is an HD clip. And once it's there, of course, it's now going to reside in my Avid Media Files folder. I can simply double click and there's the clip ready to be dropped into any project that I happen to be working on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about AMA linking to. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to talk about AMA linking to specifically for individual clips and not for volumes. We'll talk about importing AMA volumes such as XDCAM, P2 and things like that in a later lesson. But for right now, I want to talk about just getting single clips in via AMA linking to. So let's do this. What I'm going to do, we're going to come back to our imported clips. I'm simply going to right click, and instead of saying import, I'm going to come down a couple more and say AMA link. Now you're going to see the AMA window looks slightly different from the import window, but it's all still basically the same. What I want to do is inside of my Mac drive, I want to come back to my footage here. So let's find my footage. There we go. I'm simply going to double click on it. And in this case, I'm going to AMA link to my elephant shot. So I'm going to come to elephants and I'm just going to pick one of them at random. I'll just pick, elephants number 1. And I'm going to leave everything on their defaults. I'll use the current AMA settings. I'm going to auto detect AMA plugins. And I'm simply going to say open. Literally, in a matter of seconds, I now have this elephant's clip ready to play back in my timeline. Now really, that's as simple as AMA linking to it, and especially if you're coming from an application like I said before, like Final Cut Pro 7, where maybe you have a whole bunch of captured media that you want to just bring into your Media Composer timeline. Guess what? You can obviously do the import process if you want to, like I said, to make sure that everything is inside that Avid Media Files folder in case you need to take that project on the road, or if you need to get up and running lightning quick, AMA link to your footage and then get started editing right away. Okay, now along with AMA linking to comes the new feature inside of version 7, Frame Flex. Now what is Frame Flex exactly? Well, in the situation that we're in right now, this clip that I've imported is actually larger than the raster size of the project. What does that basically mean? Well, the footage I'm bringing in is HDV 1920 by 1080, and this project is only 1280 by 720. So I'm actually zooming in on this elephant. Technically if I was to bring it in and not have it shrunk down to the size of the frame, I'd actually have a lot of this elephant cut off. So basically what FrameFlex does is it gives me the ability to move the frame around this larger size shot that I haven't had access to before and I haven't been able to do before. Now, how do we find FrameFlex? Well, you'll see in an actual future lesson that what happens is that when you drop it into a timeline and you actually come into effects mode, now we're going to talk about effects mode like I said in a future lesson, but what I want to do is just show you that when you come into effects mode, you might have some effects stacked on this shot, but you're always going to have the frame flex option there as well. Why? Because you can actually adjust it right from here. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the effects editor and I'm going to come over to my clip here and I'm simply going to take the AMA clip and I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to navigate right down here to source settings. Now inside of the source settings you're going to see that we have 3 tabs. We have the AMA source settings, we have the color encoding, and what we want, which is where we started out, is frame flex. You'll see right now already the raster dimension is 1440 by 1080. The image aspect ratio is 16 by 9 and the pixel aspect ratio is 1.33 to 1 because Avid knows that this is HDV. You'll see that I can get in and I can have the same size as project's raster dimensions if I want. I can get into the aspect ratio and such and like. But for me, really, the power of frame flex is just being able to grab the frame and adjust it like this. And as I adjust it, you'll see it updates in the bottom very quickly. Now, if at any point I was happy with this, I could simply say apply, and you'll see that as soon as I say apply, it immediately updates it up here inside of the preview window. And then what I'm going to do now is simply say apply and say, okay, now I know you're probably thinking to yourself, Kev, that footage looks awful. It's so blurry. This frame flex, this doesn't work right. There's something that must be wrong with it. Well, you know what? It's not that there's anything wrong with frame flex. It's just that I'm actually not working my timeline right because I'm actually looking at my timeline in preview mode. And I can actually get out of preview mode very easily by coming right down here to the little video quality menu button, which is a yellow and green combined image or combined little icon. And I can simply click on it. And as soon as I do, you'll see suddenly the quality of this image gets worlds better. Now, of course, you got to keep in mind the footage is HDV, so the quality is only going to be so good at best. But take a look at that. I've actually gone in and I've adjusted this clip because remember, I'm adjusting it over here in my clips bin, not in the timeline. So I'm going to take this clip and I'm just going to drop it back into the timeline. You'll see that we're now actually zoomed in. What I'm going to do is just come back to the beginning here. There we go. Now what's very cool about frame flex, you'll remember I just showed you effects mode. We're going to talk about effects mode coming up in one of our next lessons. I'm just going to step back into effects mode. Why? Because we'll take a look. There's that actual frame that I had when I was adjusting it on the actual clip itself. And of course I can come in at any point and I can move this frame however I want. And you see it adjusts on the actual clip. What a fantastic feature, especially if you're working with footage like 4K footage inside of a 1920 by 1080 timeline. It gives you the flexibility of showing the entire frame or getting real specific and zooming in however you like. And of course, if I wanted to, we could come down here. I could add a keyframe there. We could just adjust this right back. And of course, you'll see that over time, this is actually going to animate. So technically, we're panning and zooming just like the Ken Burns effect inside of frame flex. Now again, we're going to talk way more about frame flex coming up in future lessons, but I wanted to just sort of give you a primer to it, especially if you're working in 2K or 4K inside a Media Composer and you obviously want to take that footage and use it in a 1920 by 1080 timeline. You have lots of choice when it comes to how you want to set this footage up and how you want to have the viewer at home see it. Now, I do want to mention before we move on that we do have some fantastic capabilities inside of version 7 of Media Composer that we've never had access to before. And one of them is background tasks. Now, what exactly is a background task? Well, let me show you. If I navigate up to the Tools drop-down, I'm going to come up to Tools, I'm going to come down to my Dynamic Media folders. And what a Dynamic Media folder is, it's a way for me to set up folders outside of Media Composer that I'm going to assign certain tasks to do. Now in this case, I have a folder called Transcodes Go Here, and you'll see that if I actually hide Media Composer and I go to my Mac drive, I've actually got a folder all the way down here at the bottom called Transcodes Go Here. You'll see I actually have a file in there right now. But what I've basically done inside of Media Composer is that with my profile called KPM1, I've told Media Composer that what I basically wanted to do is I wanted to transcode this file to DNX HD60. So let me show you how this is going to play out. What I'm going to do is just hide Media Composer. I'm going to grab a clip, and I'm just going to come into the Mac drive here, and I'm going to come all the way to the top to footage. Let's come into my footage folder. Let's just grab a boxing shot here. Come up to boxing, there's boxing, and let's just grab shot 377. I'm going to take it, and I'm simply going to drag it from one folder to another. Now, as soon as it's in that folder, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to Command and Tab back into Media Composer. We're just going to come to my Dynamic Media folder, and what we're basically going to do is nothing. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Kevin, what do you mean we're not going to do anything? Well, remember that file that I copied into that folder all of about 3 seconds ago? Well, believe it or not, it's actually already transcoded and ready to work. All of this happened in the background. All I need to do to actually get that clip is to simply come over here to Acquire, and I'm simply going to click on it, and a new bin is going to be created called DMF, obviously standing for Dynamic Media Folders Default Volume, and take a look at what's in this folder. You'll see now what's happened is that the media offline file has now been put in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come right up here to Tools, and I'm going to come down to Background Queue, and I'm going to take a look at what's going on in the background queue, and you can see that a transcode is actually going on right now. So I don't have to tie my system up by doing anything other than keeping working on my project. Once this is done, the media is going to be linked to that master clip inside the bin, and I'm going to be able to drop this into a timeline without really having any downtime at all. This is a fantastic new feature inside of Media Composer version 7, and we're going to go more into detail in it in future lessons. But I wanted to show this to you just to show you the power of the editing system that you're working on. No more of this sitting around and waiting for things to happen. Now, just tell Media Composer to take care of it in the background while you keep working with that client sitting next to you. Okay, so last but certainly not least, I did want to mention digitizing, because believe it or not, digitizing is still an important process in some people's workflows. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close everything here, and I'm just going to open my location clips bin, because if you're going to digitize, you're going to need to have a bin open. Okay, now to capture footage into Media Composer, we're going to need to access the Digitize tool. A couple ways that we can do that. What we can do, of course, because it is a tool, is navigate up to Tools, and you'll see the capture tool is located right here. Or more importantly, the shortcut is Command and 7, Control and 7 for all my Windows friends out there. So what I'm going to do is simply hit Command and 7. Now, there's a bunch of things in here that you are going to need to know that's very important. Now, there's going to be obviously different hardware out there that you might have attached to your system, whether you're using Avid hardware like a Mojo or a Nitrous, or whether you're using third-party hardware such as from Blackmagic or Aja, or even Matrox. So really, these two options right here, video and audio, are going to be slightly different based on what you're doing. If you're using, let's say for hypothetical purposes, a DV setup, you're going to want to have your video set to host 1394 and your audio set to host 1394 as well. If you happen to be using, let's say, a Blackmagic, you're going to want to come in here and find the Blackmagic capture card that you have, plus the audio device, obviously, etc., etc. Now let's just start at the top. Obviously, we have our record button, which if you had a deck connected and you were ready to go, you could simply hit record. The deck would queue up, start playing, and you'd be recording, obviously capturing footage into your system. If you're recording and you're not happy with the footage that you're getting, or you're not happy with that particular take, you can simply trash can that clip, and of course it will take that clip and delete it right away. Now the next option we have here is called cap. Now the great thing with cap is that what cap is the toggle between capturing and logging. So if you happen to be, let's say, using an HD cam deck, you could basically come in, have an assistant get in, log all your footage before you sit down to simply hit batch capture and sit back and wait for that footage to be acquired by your system. Now the next one is an interesting one. It's the toggle source button. What does the toggle source button do? Well, the toggle source button tells the Media Composer capture tool whether you'll be capturing from a deck that has timecode and control, or whether you're going to be capturing from just a live source. You'll see right now we just have the clock running, and it's running on time of day timecode. So what we're going to do is just turn that off. The next option we have here is simply the audio tool. So obviously you can click on the audio tool, or as always the shortcut Command and 1 for all my Mac friends out there, Control and 1 for all of my Windows friends. Now next, obviously fairly self-explanatory, you now need to tell Media Composer which channels you want to select, and based on the capture card that you have, you'll see in this case, because I have 1394 or Firewire selected, I only have access to video and 2 audio channels. But you might be coming from an HD Cam SR deck that you might have access to 12 channels of audio, so you can see that obviously based on the capture setup that you have set here, that's really going to determine what channels you have showing here. And obviously 99% of the time, if you're digitizing, you want to make sure you're capturing timecode. Okay, so next down, audio channel groupings. Do you want to be capturing these as a stereo pair or as 2 mono channels? Now you'll see, obviously right now we've got 2 channels, 1 and 2, 2 channels 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, etc., etc. So obviously keep that in mind as you're working. So we mentioned next, video and audio. Obviously for what source is the video coming from, what source is the audio coming from. As we move down, you can obviously come in and you can name your clip, and you can add a comment if you like. You're going to notice above that we actually have a little hidden menu here, and this is actually for stereoscopic 3D. And since I don't have stereoscopic set up, that's why this is actually hidden from me, and I don't actually have access to go in and adjust anything as far as the leading eye or the master timecode or anything like that. Obviously, if you're working in stereoscopic, this is important for the purposes of what we're doing. We don't necessarily need it. Okay, so next you'll see that we can come down, we can assign what bin we want this to go to. Now because I only have one bin open, I only have one option. Next, the resolution that we're digitizing at. This is obviously also based on the capture card that you have installed on your system. Because I have no capture device other than the Firewire connection, you'll see that my choices are somewhat limited. But if, for example, you happen to be using a Mojo box, you might have access to a whole bunch of different DNX resolutions, also things like JPEG 2000 and things like that. So obviously, again, depending on your hardware, check to see what available resolutions you have and which one will be right for your project. Now I'm just going to switch this over. Let's just switch it over to DVC Pro HD 720. You'll see in this case the Mac drive is grayed out, and in most cases if it wasn't, what would happen is you would be told how much free hard drive space you have right here. Next, you can get in and you can add an audio delay if you like, and depending on where you're coming from, if you happen to be using Vericam footage, you'll see that you can actually preserve the Vericam frames right down here. Now down at the bottom we have all of our transport controls here, as well as being able to get in and mark in points, mark out points based on wherever we happen to be on the tape. Or of course I could punch in any of this information manually if I wanted to. So I could say, let's say the shot's going to be, 5 seconds long. There we go. You'll see it actually populates all that information for me as I enter it. Now, probably the 2 most important options inside of the capture tool. The first one being the tape name. You'll see tape name is located right here. What you can do is come in and say, okay, right now we have no deck attached to this computer, but do I want to assign a number anyways? And I'm just going to say sure. What I can now do is simply come in and I'm just going to punch in a tape number of 00001. And I'm going to say okay, and as soon as I do, you're going to see it appear right down here below no deck. Now if I happen to have a deck connected and for some reason I was having some issues with Media Composer seeing that deck, I can actually come right up here, drop down no deck, and I could say auto configure. And what's basically going to happen is that Media Composer is essentially going to ping the deck to make sure the connection's there, figure out whatever that device happens to be, and then set that up as a profile inside of the capture tool so that you're actually capturing from the right source. So for example, you'll have all the right audio channels and such and alike. Okay, so that's basically a brief overview of the capture tool. These days, not as many people are capturing as they used to, but I wanted to show you this tool because it's obviously an important tool, much like importing and AMA linking too. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I do want to mention something that I think is very important, and this one is specifically for all of you Final Cut Pro 7 users out there. I'm glad you've decided to make the switch to Avid's Media Composer, and fear not, you are able to get all of your sequences from Final Cut from your Final Cut Pro timeline into Media Composer. And there's a fantastic free utility that's going to help you do just that. What I encourage you to do is to head on over to automaticduck.com/products. The product you want is to come right over here for Pro Export FCP 4.0. What this basically does is it lets you move your Final Cut Pro project over to Avid's Media Composer, and there are a whole bunch of supported parameters for things like motion effects, freeze frames, nested sequences, subclips, and many more. So that way when you send your Final Cut Pro timeline over, it's not just going to be a bare bones edit. Now I know you're thinking to yourself, well Kev, I don't really have much money to spend on this. Well, the best part is that this utility is absolutely free. And like I said, we're going to talk more about it in a future lesson, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because if you're ready to make that switch and you still have some projects that you don't want to be going back to Final Cut Pro 7 for, you know what? Transfer them over to Media Composer and start working with them right away. Oh, and by the way, I do want to mention one last thing, is that if I come back to my DMF default volume, remember that clip that was transcoding? Take a look, it's done. And there it is, ready to work with. All this was happening in the background while I was going through this tutorial. So if you want to get post-production workflow tutorials and industry insight that you need to bring great stories to life, head on over to avidblogs.com/post.